U.S. conscription drafting was done on a regional basis where all men, usually between the ages of 18 and 26, had to report and would be granted one of 5 categories. 1A, available for military service, 2S, student deferment, 3A, hardship deferment, 4F, medically unfit, 1O, conscientious objector. He motioned me to follow him. He took me down a hallway and introduced me to a young man sitting on a bench. The sergeant told me that Gupton was also being assigned to Fort Benning. "I want you to take charge of Gupton," he said. "Go with him every step of the way." He explained that the young man could neither read nor write and would need help filling out paperwork. Then he added, "Make sure he doesn't get lost. He's one of McNamara's morons." War brought out both the best and worst in men who came into contact with the New Standards men. Some were given the appalling task of leading a patrol because, in the words of one infantry squad leader, quote, "If anybody has to die, better a dummy than the rest of us." Robert and Barry Romo were born just a month apart, but Barry was in fact Robert's uncle. Nonetheless, the two grew up side by side and remained close until Barry became First Lieutenant Barry Romo and shipped off to Vietnam. A year after his arrival, he received some news that seemed barely believable. Robert had been enlisted, and he was going through basic training. In Barry's own words, Robert had always been very slow, almost certainly autistic, and had failed the AFQT. But with Project 100,000 now in force, Robert just about made the grade. Horrified at the thought of Robert in combat, Barry wrote a letter to the base commander at Fort Lewis asking him to remove Robert from training. His warning was stark. If he was sent to Vietnam, he would undoubtedly die. His request was denied. Robert Romo was bundled through basic training and was immediately sent to a position near the border with North Vietnam, coincidentally in the same brigade as his uncle. At the time, there were few more dangerous places in the whole world. After arriving, Robert was terrified at where he was and what he was tasked with doing. He begged Barry to get him out of the field, but that would have breached numerous military ethics. One day, while returning from a patrol, Robert's uncle came under fire. As he ran to help pull a friend from safety, he was shot through the throat by a sniper and slowly bled out because the fighting was too fierce for a medic to reach him. Barry Romo asked to accompany his nephew's body back to the United States, a request that was granted. He later said, quote, "Robert really didn't have much luck. While others were getting deferments, he was drafted. While congressmen's sons were getting exemptions for braces on their teeth, Robert was drafted as part of Project 100,000. Project 100,000 came into being in the mid-1960s, when thinking around mental health and learning difficulties was archaic compared to what we have today. This was a time when phrases like mentally defective, imbecile, and mentally retarded were actually clinical terms. What happened to the hundreds of thousands who fell into the New Standards men category was beyond shocking to our modern minds, yet back in the 1960s and 70s, while not exactly fully accepted, it was far more palatable. There was, however, the dark stain of inequality that went far beyond lowering standards. Poor people were far more likely to go to Vietnam than the rich, many of whom used sneaky loopholes to remain out of reach of the draft. The young Donald Trump was one such man who received 4 draft deferments while he was at college, and a 5th when a kind doctor diagnosed him with bone spurs in his heels, placing him in a medical exemption category. Joe Biden didn't go because of his asthma, and George W. Bush entered the Texas Air National Guard in 1968, which drastically reduced his chances of being called up because Congress wanted to shield the reserves at all costs. And how did he get one of those coveted spots that everybody was clamoring for? Well, I think you can probably guess. Those who were too poor to be in college or too unconnected to have a doctor bail you out, well, they were shipped to Vietnam, where they died in their thousands. Vietnam was a war of stark inequality that went well beyond Project 100,000. 80% of US troops in Vietnam came from working class or poor backgrounds, even though those groups made up far less of the college-educated population, while college students were 25 to 30 times less likely to be sent to Vietnam than non-students during peak draft years. Research also shows that men from higher socioeconomic backgrounds were not only less likely to serve, but when they did serve, they were more likely to enter as officers or hold non-combat roles. Project 100,000 was a blatant, appalling miscarriage of logic and basic human decency, but that was just the tip of the iceberg. In the words of Joe Galloway, a war correspondent who was awarded a Bronze Star with Valor for carrying wounded men to safety at the Battle of the La Drang Valley, quote, "Project 100,000 men were, to put it bluntly, mentally deficient, illiterate, mostly blacks and redneck whites, hailing from the mean big city ghettos and the remote Appalachian valleys. By drafting them, the Pentagon would not have to draft an equal number of middle-class and elite college boys whose mothers could and would raise hell with their representatives in Washington. End quote. And thank you for watching.